Before we even knew what it was called, Assassin's Creed Shadows had a target on its back. Culture warriors had been frothing over the casting of historical black samurai Yasuke as one of the protagonists ever since the first screenshot leaked, prompting several ill-advised attempts by Ubisoft to defame the haters concerned about historical accuracy. Shadows was also delayed twice, at a time when Ubisoft desperately needs a hit, and the scent of blood has industry critics and Tencent's bankers circling. As analysts ready their takes on what Shadows means for the future of the industry's old giants and their giant open-world games, I've got a simpler question to answer. Is Shadows fun? I'm so glad that one is an easy yes. In terms of stealth and action, Shadows is a successful return to what made early Assassin's Creed great. And impressively, it also has the best, stickiest combat this series has ever seen. But it also drags along baggage from Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla. Shadows is massive, but its bloated map of breathtaking castles, unending temples, quaint villages, and gorgeous countryside is much wider than it is deep. It's got quests, companions, and dialogue options clearly designed to resemble a BioWare or Bethesda classic, but the resemblance is only superficial, and I didn't find the characters or stories memorable. A disjointed main story, bland cast, and barrage of quests that all end the same way has been missing the days when Assassin's Creed was solely focused on the two things it still excels at: infiltrating a place and killing the right guy inside. As if Ubisoft knew exactly how to get on this classic AC fan's good side, one of Shadow's protagonists has something we haven't had much lately in these games: a direct link to the Assassin Brotherhood. Naoe's story begins much like Ezio's, with family tragedy, the passing down of a hidden blade, and the destruction of her shinobi village, fueling a quest for revenge against a shadowy organization of masked killers. It's a routine kickoff, but its emotional beats are elevated by Naoe actor Masumi Sonoda's performance capture, Ubisoft's sharper cinematography this time around, and a rippin' soundtrack, a collaboration between traditional composers and Canadian-Japanese rock group Teke Teke. Confusingly, the first chunk of Shadows is almost exclusively the Naoe show, as she checks the first few names off her big killboard. Yasuke, meanwhile, sits on the sidelines after a brief prologue depicting his introduction to Oda Nobunaga as a slave of Jesuit priests and his rise amongst his ranks. All the Naoe time early on centers Shadow's story on Naoe's crusade. While the majority of quests let you play as either character, Ubisoft never quite builds a case for Yasuke's dedication to Naoe's cause being stronger than "these guys gotta go." He spends the majority of the journey as Naoe's dutiful partner, occasionally flexing his status as a respected samurai to get information, while his personal stake isn't properly explored until the story is nearly over. For as much attention as Yasuke drew in the lead up to Shadows, his unique identity rarely even factors into dialogue.
Has your skin always been this way?
Yes, Lord Nobunaga.
Similarly, the companions that join Naoe and Yasuke's league and hang out in their new shinobi headquarters, a thief, a displaced shinobi, an orphan child, and more, they typically have a stronger connection to Naoe. Shadow's preference for Naoe can also be felt in how you solve problems. Between all the hiding places, rooftops, crawl spaces, and Tenshu towers that only she can climb, the world is undoubtedly catered to her stealthy toolset. And I can't say enough nice things about the new Splinter Cell-inspired visibility meter. Visibility is now a sliding scale based on stance, distance, and light level. This is the first time darkness has truly mattered in Assassin's Creed. Where past assassins had to stay glued to rooftops to stay incognito, Naoe can choose to stay grounded, eliminating light sources and staying nearly invisible in dark shadows. That level of nuance in detection, plus the brilliant addition of prone slithering, claws Assassin's Creed out of the rut of tall grass, waist-high cover, and insta-kill bows that big-budget games have been stuck in for a decade. We used to be a society that appreciated dynamic shadows and sophisticated patrols, that hair-raising feeling of staying dead still in a hallway, praying a guard turns around in the next 10 seconds. Shadows is a leap in the right direction for stealth, but I have nitpicks. There are 3 difficulty modes for stealth. Combat is a separate parameter, conveniently, but the first 2 are just too easy. I eventually ramped it up to expert, which worked out great at first. Guards kept me on my toes with their ability to finally look up at rooftops and see better in low light, but I eventually cranked it back down after grinding against extremely fast detection times that made daytime missions unfun. This is classic post-release patch territory that I hope Ubisoft gets around to, but deeper difficulty settings or more presets would have helped a lot. I'm also conflicted about Shadow's changing seasons. The pitch is exactly the sort of quietly ambitious idea that Ubisoft loves to build entire games around, quirks be damned. Time passes as you complete quests, and every few hours the whole map transforms to fit the season. Ubisoft artists actually hunkered down and made 4 variations of its gigantic map, and they're all absurdly pretty. But the promise that seasonal conditions would change my playstyle never really happened. The differences are there, they're just slight. A few times I hid in some grass that wouldn't have been there in the winter, for instance. Rainfall does dampen noise to a degree, though it'd be much easier to tell if Ubisoft went the whole way with a Splinter Cell noise meter. And castle walls are easier to scale when their surrounding moats are frozen. But I never really had to change up my strategy. What matters more than anything is time of day. Those pretty shadows can only fully hide you at night, and weirdly, there's no NGS5-like cigar that passes the time for you. So I did a lot more daytime infiltrations than I would have preferred. But the day is when Yasuke shines. I expected Shadow's emphasis on Nawe to invalidate the whole dual protagonist shtick, and yet I ended up playing more of the main story as Yasuke. That's just how fun Ubisoft's made cutting guys down to size. There's nothing revolutionary going on with Shadow's light attacks, heavy attacks, blocks, and parries, but this is the first time Assassin's Creed combat has felt great since the chain-killing days of Ezio. Gone are the sauceless, floaty combos of Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla. Blades clash, they cleave, or draw blood with every collision. Repeated blows shed armor and send helmets flying, making enemies more vulnerable. Most objects that aren't nailed down are destructible, which is largely an aesthetic upgrade, but is also useful for the occasional environmental assist by launching a bandit into a cabbage stand with Yasuke's kick. That's an ability that never left my shortcuts. Combat didn't immediately sink. Those first 10 hours locked to Nawe were a struggle. Challenging a room full of Ronin and Spearmen with her limited weapon options is signing up for hard mode. She can parry, but she can't block. Her health pool is half of Yasuke's. She deals way less damage, and it takes ages to stagger even medium-sized enemies. I spent most of my Nawe time like I had a sword-fighting allergy, which made Yasuke's late introduction cathartic. He radiates, "I'm not trapped in here with you, you're trapped in here with me" energy, shrugging off glancing blows and overpowering low-level grunts with sheer muscle. He sucks at climbing and will snap every tightrope you try to walk him across, but he can also shove guys to the ground just by sprinting at them. Ubisoft tries to balance Yasuke's one-note playstyle by giving him way more combat options. He has 5 distinct weapon skill trees versus Nawe's 3, and his special abilities are exclusively aggressive. By level 30, I'd unlocked a clutch katana lifesteal move that dealt more damage the less health I had. It's never quite enough to overcome the reality that maining Yasuke is like playing an easier, simpler samurai video game versus Nawe's high-stake infiltrations, but the option to swap at almost any time meant I could go stealthy with Nawe when being a one-man army got dull, then flip to Yasuke when I got tired of tiptoeing around guards instead of plowing right through them. My flip-flopping between playstyles mirrored how I also played Ghost of Tsushima, a game that literally asks, what if a ninja was also a samurai? But unlike Jin Sakai, Master Shinobi, and one-man Mongol meat grinder, Shadows forced me to play around Nawe and Yasuke's weaknesses. Some of my best memories with Yasuke involved trying to keep him in stealth using cover, shadows, and special armor-piercing arrows, a Sisyphean task for the lumbering oaf. Nawe's fragility made patient, careful stealth more consequential and exciting. As a lapsed AC fan who liked how Mirage dialed back to the loot craze of Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, it took some time to accept how deeply loot-motivated Shadows is. Its open world is overstuffed with raw materials, minerals, hay, cloth, and wood used to expand my hideout or upgrade weapons, and they're mine for the taking, even when the context doesn't make any sense. It's easy enough to accept that Nawe and Yasuke's plan to bring peace and balance to Japan involves plundering the nobility's castles, Robin Hood style, but Ubisoft never sufficiently establishes why it's cool to mercilessly pillage a local trade harbor or slaughter all the guards at some dude's house to steal his prized katana. I guess it's not a leap to imagine our vigilantes are only targeting crooked warlords, though I suspect even that applies more logic to Ubisoft's world than it really intended. Shadows exhibits a kill first, ask questions never ever approach to questing that would probably go down smoother if I were a Diablo or World of Warcraft guy. Despite the presence of a BioWare-like dialogue wheel, conversations were brief, and most NPCs are just vending machines spitting out tasks, allowing no follow-up questions about what I'm doing or where I'm going. Not even my companions could be chatted up in any significant way outside of their recruitment quests. Maybe I'm feeling the shallow world building harder because of Shadow's proximity to two strong, talkative RPGs in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and Avowed, but I'm not that hard to please. I roamed Japan by horse looking to make connections and found only throats to stab. In dozens of hours, I can recall exactly one memorable character in a side quest, a mysterious yokai who's actually just a dude who dresses up as a melon every spring and fights his friend. That guy rocked. Melon Man aside, Shadows is just one huge bounty board. There is no traditional quest list or journal tab, only an objective screen that maps out the dozen-plus factions who need killing in Japan. It never gets more complicated. Shadows is the sort of game that assumes I'm so concerned with XP and legendary gear that it tells me exactly what rewards I'll get before I've even started a task. It's the kind of RPG where every region has an NPC who asks me to murder exactly 100 bad guys. The only thing that makes sense in this world is the loot. And admittedly, the loot is strong. My eyes were ready to glaze over Shadow's procedural loot the first time I pulled an uncommon Tonto out of a box, but it didn't take long to find epic and legendary gear that comes with genuinely exciting, game-changing perks. The very first castle I toppled in Kyoto gave me an armor set that let Yasuke parry unblockable red attacks, an ability so valuable that I kept upgrading that chest piece for the next 20 hours. Now I'm nearly level 40 and up to my neck in powerful gear competing for my attention. I love that Shadows isn't precious about handing out legendaries and even tells me what the biggest prize in a palace, fort, or castle is before I spend 20 minutes tearing it apart. But what ties a nice bow on the whole loot experience is a flexible engraving system that I unlocked a few days in. Every new perk found in a chest or attached to a weapon becomes an engraving that I can pay to apply to any other gear. By the time I had dozens of helmets, armors, and weapons crowding my pockets, I built up this elaborate library of remappable perks that let me put together some truly overpowered gear. Ubisoft's interpretation of 16th century Japan is an achievement, but its locations have more personality than the people who inhabit them. Its cities are dense and appear active, but interactivity is low. The central city of Kyoto has hundreds of civilians, merchants, and craftsmen going about their lives, yet I can interact with just 2 or 3 merchants selling rations or horses. City guards patrol the streets, but cutting them down in broad daylight has zero consequences beyond upsetting city folk in the vicinity. There is no concept of crime or a wanted status unless you really mess up in a restricted zone, and guards within those zones won't chase me outside of them. That's the real culprit, making Shadow's cities feel artificial. Older eras of Assassin's Creed knew how to make cities one cohesive playground. In nearly 50 hours of Shadows, though, I haven't had a single satisfying chase because it's so easy to just jump over a wall and watch guards immediately lose interest. As with all main Assassin's Creed games, Ubisoft is using its own proprietary game engine, Anvil, to power Shadows, where Snowdrop uses ray tracing all the time, as seen in Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora and Star Wars Outlaws. The use of pixel-perfect lighting is mostly optional. Only the hideout is rendered with ray-traced global illumination, and that's because the highly customizable nature of the home base makes it too difficult to use pre-baked lighting. You can activate ray tracing across the whole game if you want to, either just for global illumination, aka RTGI, or for reflections as well. Naturally, the use of ray tracing can hamper the game's performance, but that depends very much on your model of graphics card. A Radeon RX 6750 XT running at 1440p with the very high quality preset drops around 28% in its average frame rate when RTGI is enabled, whereas a GeForce RTX 5080 at 4K with the ultra quality preset only loses 9%. For older GPUs without ray tracing hardware, Assassin's Creed Shadows will use a shader-based system for ray tracing, but the performance hit is so big it's really not worth using. Don't bother with upscaling either. While some graphics cards do enjoy a reasonable performance uplift from FSR, DLSS, or XeSS enabled, it's never enough to turn Shadows into a high frame rate game. To stand any chance of reaching triple figures, you'll need a very powerful gaming PC, and even then, you'll also need to use frame generation. Either that, or you'll have to play Shadows at 1080p with low settings. With a Ryzen 7 9800X 3D and a GeForce RTX 5080, Assassin's Creed Shadows averages 54 FPS at 4K Ultra, 66 FPS at 1440p Ultra, and 80 FPS at 1080p Ultra. Enable frame generation and you can enjoy over 100 FPS, but the game is best suited to around 60, the same target frame rate as on the PS5 and Xbox Series X. Assassin's Creed Shadows is arguably the best looking of all the AC games, especially with full RTGI, but it's also pretty demanding on your gaming PC's hardware. Fortunately, it still looks good at lower quality settings, and it does scale quite well across a range of hardware configurations. Just don't expect blistering frame rates and you'll be fine. If you're noticing a roller coaster shaped review here, it's because appreciating Shadows took some calibration. It had me asking myself what I liked about Assassin's Creed and questioning if my gripes with its weak characters and dull storylines were real hindrances or perceived deficiencies that I created by holding Shadows to an arbitrary RPG rubric. When I booted up Shadows for the first time since rolling credits a few days ago, my quest tab was still packed with faces and names to hunt down. Warlords, samurai, corrupt merchants, supposed yokai, so I chose a target at random. The ritual was comforting. Pick a target, deduce the location, sneak in, and get the kill. I kept at it for a couple of hours, trying bolder strategies to go undetected, putting new loadouts through their paces, and challenging myself to find targets with minimal clues. Geez, this game is so huge that I haven't even mentioned its brilliant navigation. By default, you're only given clues about where people and places are, like southwest of X or near a street with red lamps. The idea is to use scouts, a reconnaissance currency, to search an area and confirm where to go. But if you skip that part, something as routine as writing to a quest marker becomes its own little game of GeoGuessr. It was the best time I'd had in Shadows since the start, and I couldn't quite place why. The fact that the main story was behind me and I didn't feel rushed anymore was a factor, but I wasn't just relaxed. I was reveling in my checklist game, savoring every assassination and not thinking about what I'd change about it. It's like I'd finally learned how to like Shadows. On my second monitor, my partner was dueling a lightning dragon in Monster Hunter Wilds, and it occurred to me that we were basically doing the same thing, picking names, hunting targets, seeking loot. I don't think Shadows is something to marathon. You could completely ignore the story, come back 6 months later, and still be up to speed. The head's gotta roll. I know I'll still be picking away at its 30 plus castles later in 2025 and probably 2026, because I get the itch for a great stealth game every few months, and now I have a new one with a whole lot of stuff to do.